Hello, my name is Dan Humberg, and this is an instructional video from harvestfires.com. This particular video is kind of a patch. It's meant to help individuals that are putting the tin on an early series Case model 8010 combine. I designed a kit for the 8010 and the early 8120 combines that use the same engine and same exhaust system, and that's gone on a number of machines. But I didn't realize when we designed that there was an earlier version of the turbocharger on the 8010s that was used from the release of the 8010 up through 2005 or 2006. I'm not sure exactly where the cutoff date was. But that earlier turbocharger has a wastegate actuator on the left side, or on the compressor side of it, and then the wastegate turbo itself. And so the tin kit that was designed for the later 8010 and early 8120 engines and exhaust systems won't fit around that wastegate actuator. It's a slightly simpler turbo on those later machines, and the tin that was designed to fit closely around that turbo does not fit around the earlier one, which is just different geometry. And since I have a number of kits, or sent out some kits for 8010s, I need to fix that so that people can get that turbocharger enclosed. I've designed a tin patch kit, or a replacement set of parts to go around the turbocharger. It actually is the parts that go around the turbocharger and the parts that cover the exhaust pipe up to the muffler. And there was just enough difference between those two that it was easier just to design and cut new parts for that whole part of the system. They moved the turbocharger out a little bit on the later ones from this one. I believe this one is just a little bit closer. The turbo is just a little bit closer to the block, about 3/4 of an inch or so, but it makes everything not fit well there as well. So this tin has now been designed to fit the 8010 models from their release up through the time they changed to the turbocharger without the wastegate actuator, and I hope that it will fit well and relatively easy to put together on there. I haven't actually fit it on a combine because I don't have one of those close by to do that. I was able to find one a ways away that I could measure in order to do the design, and I believe that the design is good enough that if you have to do any modification, it would be relatively minor trimming or modification to make it fit. So I hope that that'll be the case, that it'll work well on these machines that are earlier. The kit does not change the parts that cover the exhaust manifold. That was the same manifold, same exhaust manifold as was used throughout the 8010 and the 8120 kits. And so I'm not sending new parts for that part of the enclosure, and I'm probably not going to show you how to bend and assemble those parts. If you're getting a new kit, complete new kit, and you're starting from scratch on your machine, you may want to watch another video. There's one that's designed just for the 8120, 8010 and early 8120 models. It'll be another half-hour video or whatever, but it shows how to fold the tin for that one. And the first part of that is going to be how to fold the parts that go around the exhaust manifold and assemble that. And that's going to be the same for that combine as well as this one. Eventually I may get a video assembled or patched together or edited that shows this turbo cover on that set of manifold parts, but that's not going to be today. I'm trying to get this done in a hurry. So I'll start showing you how to bend the tin here. I'm not going to go through all the spiel about tools and stuff, and the traditional warning about, well, I should tell you that you can still have fires on your combine, because there's many things that can cause a fire in the combine. It's just that if we have this system properly installed, you shouldn't have fires from the exhaust system anymore, which is the vast majority of the fires that occur in volatile crops. But you can still start a fire with a wiring harness short, or friction in a spot where you've got a belt or something that's rubbing on something, or an alternator that's throwing sparks, or a hot bearing that's failing. Any of those things can cause a fire on a combine, and so that'll still be the case after this, but you shouldn't have the chronic fires anymore that you have with sunflowers or canola or safflower or other volatile crops once this kit is on there. So having said that, let's start looking at the parts. I'm going to get you looking down at my bench where I've got pieces to show. Okay, you're looking down at my bench top here. I've got tin spread all over it, but we're just going to look at a handful of pieces. I've got the pieces in the back here are actually the pieces that cover the manifold. They're still flat, and I'm not going to bend them up. I'd rather not bend up the whole set of tin if I can avoid it, just because then I have a whole bunch of tin that's all bent up and it's harder to ship. But I do have the piece here that covers the manifold on the left side. If you're facing the manifold, sitting with your back to the grain tank and looking at the exhaust system, this is the left side manifold cover. It would have a couple bends here to wrap it around the end, to curve it around or bend it around the end of the manifold. I don't really need to bend that to show you, but this we are going to attach to this with some of the turbocharger parts, and so I'll keep that one out. This one over here is the right side manifold cover. It's just a rectangular piece but has a bunch of strategic holes. Also has the dotted lines to bend so that it will wrap around the, what to me is the right hand side of the exhaust system, the manifold, and box that in against the block. The top piece and bottom piece are those pieces that are back here that I won't mess with because we don't need them for this. But I'll keep those there for now. Those pieces are actually numbered 9 and 10. In the old, I kept the numbering from the old kit for those parts that didn't change. So 9 and 10. Parts 1, 2, and 3 are the ones that are back here under the window. Then there may be some differences in numbering after that for parts that we're going to look at here, but we could start with number 4. This piece, you can look at it, all of these parts now have a part number cut into them. It's usually cut into a flange where it won't affect the sealing of the kit at all. In this case, part number is right here. It's C10W. That's for CaseIH8010 wastegate, for if you want to know what it means. And then there's a number 4 with an underscore, so that's part number 4. And we can look at that part. All of those part numbers are generally put on there so that when the part is bent up and fit on, that part number is going to be on the exterior of the enclosure. So it helps sometimes to know how to orient the part to say, okay, if I look at it so that it reads right, C10W, part number 4 with an underscore under the 4, that's going to be the outside of that part. And so this piece is going to go up against the manifold cover on the left side of the turbo, upper left side, above the turbo and on the left side. I'm going to use my Harbor Freight pliers here. If you need something to bend with, these are about 15 bucks and it's worth it for doing these kits. I'm just going to bend the flanges on this. This top flange that says C has the part number on it. It's going to bend down away from this face 90 degrees, just like that. This forward flange is going to bend over 90 degrees as well. There, I bent that little tab there that caught that with the other one. I'll flatten it out with my pterodactyl or whatever. It looks like a dinosaur. That's my flat-jawed pliers. It's pretty good for this tin. Then this one, this flange, is about 2 inches square, will bend 90 degrees out to the left. And that's the piece that's all bent up and ready to attach. In this case, this one is going to go up against go up against this manifold cover right here. And we actually have 2 holes that line up there. There's a third hole that doesn't line up. Don't worry about that for now. But those 2 holes line up, and if we needed to, we could actually, we can't. Those 2 holes, screw holes there, one of them is a small hole, so I could put a screw through that and it would hold it together. The other ones are both large pilot holes that are cut by the laser, and that's going to go through into the flange from the top piece to hold it to the top cover over the manifold there. But that's piece number 4. When you put it on, you're going to have to split this a little bit and slip it down over the pressure line that comes to your turbocharger bearing. That's what this cut is for. And I'm going to point that out now because that's an important piece. I would typically take this pliers or another pliers and bend just a little bit of these fingers around that hole. bend them, particularly the ones in the forward. I would probably bend out because this piece is, or maybe I'd bend them in. I'd have to look at the oil line. I'd probably do this on the machine. That oil line passes through here just like my finger at an angle. And so as it's coming through at an angle, I would probably bend these forward tabs in a little bit this way so that they're smooth against that thing, so we don't have a sharp edge running against that oil line. The ones in the back I would probably bend out again so that they parallel my finger just a little bit. Not very large, you don't need very much, but those cuts also allow, in case that oil line is moved a little bit on your machine from where it was on my test machine or my measuring machine, you can adjust this opening position. Once you have this installed on the combine, my recommendation is that you button this hole up with some of that aluminum foil tape so that it doesn't allow the air blast from the radiator to push dust in here, because the turbocharger is right behind there. So we do not want to allow any dust to get blasted in there. So once you've got clearance around that oil line and you've got it bent so that you don't have anything abrasive or rubbing on that oil line, you got a little bit of clearance, then you can button up that space by putting some patches of that aluminum foil tape on there. Sticks really good, forms to fit, and it'll help seal that up so that the blast from the radiator deflects off there and we don't get dust pushed into the turbo there. So that's part number 4. Part number 5 is the back part of this upper half of the turbo cover. And in this case, it's an odd looking piece, and this one's already bent up because my guy that cut parts for me shorted me this one. Somehow it got lost in the mix, and so it didn't show up when the other parts did. So I made one just from a pattern, and I bent it. I can show you the flanges on it. It'll have a cut dotted line here and a cut dotted line here. You bend each of those about 45 degrees. You can see the bends here. So we bend 45, we bend another 45, and we got a total of 90. And there's probably a dotted line here. That's a mistake. That should have been removed before it got cut. So if you got a dotted line there, don't worry about it. Just leave it alone. You could even patch it over with some of that aluminum foil tape so that it doesn't allow anything to go in for that. But it probably won't matter where it's located. Now this piece, once it's bent, it should have a hole here. Mine didn't, so I had to drill a hole there. But this piece is going to slip in around. There's a partial cutout right here and a partial cutout right here, and those are going to close in around the wastegate actuator shaft. The wastegate actuator has a pneumatic, a little piston, and when the boost pressure comes up high enough, it pushes this rod out, kind of like a push rod on a piston or something else, and then it changes the angle of the exhaust gas inside the exhaust turbine so that you don't get too much boost, I guess. And so that arm goes through here at an angle, kind of like my finger on the machine, about like this. And so once this piece is on, we can slip this one with this cutout here underneath that wastegate arm and rotate it around in place until this hole lines up with this larger hole here. And then you'll probably have to shoot a screw through from the inside over the turbocharger to lock those two together. But if we do that right, now you can see you got a small hole here, and that wastegate arm will go right through that hole. Now you may need to trim this to open that hole up just a little bit in case that arm isn't exactly on your machine exactly where it was on this one, or in case my tin isn't a perfect design. Now that's all right. You can cut that opening a little bit larger if necessary on either piece to make sure it fits with just a little bit of clearance around that wastegate rod. You also, that wastegate rod, when it moves forward and backward, it's going to shift just a little bit at an angle because it runs a crank on the other end of it. And as that crank moves, that rod is going to shift to the side a little bit. So make sure it's got enough clearance so that it can operate freely. And that one, you can button up the hole with some tape, but don't tape it to the rod so that the rod is locked in place. You can just tighten up the opening a little bit if you want with tape around that rod, if necessary. If it fits pretty close, it shouldn't be a problem. Okay, so we got two pieces there. That's piece 4 and piece 5. I'm going to jump to piece 7. Piece 6 is going to go down below here. But piece 7 is this patch, this piece. It does not have any, as it says C10W7 here. It doesn't have any bends in it, but it'll slide in from the front this way, and again, to close in the space around that wastegate rod. It just allows us to make it fit close around that and kind of from 3 different directions. And there are holes here, here, and here, and you can shoot screws through there to hold this piece on. I guess there's a 4th one here that you could go through all of those to hold this on. And there's even, looks like there's one here that might come through from the back side and hold it on here. So that'll hold the whole combine together, I think. Anyway, that's meant to enclose that wastegate rod. Again, if you need to trim it, you can trim it to fit. But now you got ways to close in around that rod and minimize the amount of air space around it so that we don't lose too much air there and we don't allow the dust to blow in from this side, because the radiator is blowing at this side of the radiator fan is blowing at this side of the enclosure. In this case, this bend will allow this to shift up and around over the turbocharger exhaust turbine. Now there's a support bracket for the wastegate actuator that's here. That's why I had to bend this to clear, and I didn't just do a 90 out here the way I did on the earlier or later design. So this should clear underneath that support bracket for the wastegate actuator and slip in underneath that and clear that. So that's piece 4, 5, and 7. And I can put those together here. I'll do that with a couple of screws. Okay, I put 3 screws in there. It holds this thing together. There's still a little bit of flex in this outer piece here. Now this cutout here will fit over the top hump in the turbocharger bearing. It'll fit down in there right over the bearing, and this whole face, this whole side of this, should be almost tight up against the turbocharger compressor face. The part the side of the turbocharger that takes the clean air and compresses it. And so that should fit right here up against this, right around this. It should be concentric with this. This is kind of the upper part of a circle where that bearing is. The compressor fits out here, and the oil line shoots through there right near that. And then that oil line makes a dive straight down, I guess. It comes up and then back through and then to this turbocharger bearing. So that's the piece that's going to go above left side of the turbocharger, right between the compressor and the exhaust turbine. Let's come back to piece number 6. C10W6 is here on this flange. I'll show you how to bend it. This one again is going to have a 45 here, another 45 there, so we get a total of 90 degrees here, those 2 ones. These little tabs will bend over 90 degrees, or very close to 90 degrees. These on the bottom, we'll talk about them in a minute. Some of these you can actually just bend by hand with your fingers. Again, I'm taking looking at the face where the letters read correctly, C10W6, and I'm bending the flanges, in this case, away from that face. This big flange out here bends up the opposite direction, 90 degrees. And this flange that's attached to that one will bend under 90 degrees. So it looks like that. I can see I'm missing a hole or 2 here. These pieces are going to go together. Remember, this is above the turbocharger bearing. This piece is going to come in from below and up under the turbocharger bearing, and it's going to overlap the other one. This little bitty flange on this back end of this one can bend 90 degrees as well. Now these will come together like this from above and below and wrap around that turbocharger bearing. I'm missing a hole in this one because that's that piece I had to fabricate here because the guy didn't get it cut. So there should be a hole to match up here to shoot those two together, but there isn't in this case. And looks to me like I missed one hole in the design. There should be a small pilot hole in this piece to match up with the one in front here, this one. That doesn't mean you can't put one in there. You can. You just aren't sure yet where to put it. Let's look at how this is going to go on to the other parts. This is the piece that's going to cover the exhaust manifold, and that's vertical, and it's like what goes together like this. So let's shoot a screw or two through there and put this together. Okay, that would assemble like this. Okay, I put a hole in here where I think it needs to be. This piece is going to fit up against the left side manifold cover. Should go over the top of it. This hole will line up here. It's a large pilot hole, so the screw won't bite in there, but it will bite in the flange of the underlying piece, the bottom manifold cover. So it helps you know when you're in the right spot anyway. This one, I'm not sure whether we want to go to the inside of this piece or the outside of the piece. Don't know if it matters. Well, it does matter from where the holes are. It matters which direction you come in with the screw from. So we could shoot a screw through here. Okay, I shot that one through from the left side, which you may be able to do, but you're going to need to use, I usually provide a long driver bit, about a foot long, and you could get that one in from shooting it here. You're going to have a compressor in the way here, but you can reach back in and shoot that one through. You can also switch this around, put this on the outside, and then reach through from the other side behind the turbo potentially, but that may be difficult. The turbo neck may be right there, and so it's only possible to get it through from this side. So that's how those two go together. There should be a hole line back here. There isn't because of this part. You can see it. There's one here on the back side of this one. And that hole, that screw probably has to go through from the right side. You may not be able to get here because the compressor's in the way, but you could go through from the right over the turbo exhaust turbine there and get those put together. But that's the left side pieces that cover the left side of the turbocharger compressor, and allow for that actuator for the wastegate to be out here and the rod to go through. And now this enclosure goes up higher. It's taller than the one on the later machines because it's just designed differently, because it fits over that additional stuff that's on the exhaust system. So those are the left side portions of that cover over the turbo. We're going to go to the right side. Those are parts 8, C10W-8 with the underscore, and this is part number 13, C10W13, and again that'll be the outside where the number reads from. So this piece is going to go underneath the right hand side of the exhaust. It's actually outside of the turbocharger and is going to wrap around the exhaust pipe here. I think the exhaust pipe is 3.5 inches, and I made this about 3 3/4 or something like that. So there should be a little bit of clearance here, but in any case, it should fit up around the exhaust pipe outside of the turbo, and all of the bolts that bolt onto the exhaust system. They should all be inside of this. Okay, so there are the bends on the bottom right-hand side of the turbocharger exhaust turbine. This is going to be the top part. These two will mate up here. Okay, so that's the top side of the turbocharger compressor cover on the right side. These will screw together. Okay, that's that part assembled, those two. Now, when you're on the machine, of course, you have to put this up from the bottom, this down from the top, and then put it together from the side here. If we've done that correctly, this piece will fit up against this right-hand face of the manifold cover. There's a series of holes there. There are 4 holes. You can see that pilot holes line up. Now, the top and the bottom ones are both large pilot holes because they're going to go into the flange of the top piece up here. But the middle ones, I can shoot screws through to hold that on to show you how it goes. Okay, so now we have the left side and the right side of the turbocharger compressor or exhaust turbine assembled onto the pieces that represent your manifold cover. 2 pieces now that are going to wrap around and fill in the rest of that. Wrap around this thing and close it up. This first one is actually part number 19. C10W_19. It is going to go on the bottom. I can show it like this. This is the part number is on the outside, as if you were looking up on the bottom from the outside. And we have a wide flange here that goes underneath the manifold. It's going to be back underneath here. And then we have to bend down just slightly. If you're looking down on this, you can see this angle. This piece needs to fit just like that. So we put about that much bend in it. And then this flange is going to fit along the bottom here. I overdid it. There, like that. And that should line up with both sides of this. So now I've got there's screw holes here that should line up so that when we're assembling this on the machine, you can shoot screws in from the bottom. Now you'll notice this cutout here in the corner. That's for the oil line, the return oil line from the turbo bearing. That's a larger line than the one going in. This one's about 3/4 of an inch in diameter, and I've cut fingers on here so that if you need to open it up a little bit, you can open it up both to accommodate that line if it's moved a little bit from where I estimated it to be, but also I usually bend these fingers, in this case probably, let's see, in this case it may be up because this piece is going to be right here and it's going to, I take that back. These 2 little flanges will bend in from the side, the left side on the bottom of this one, and this will go underneath here. So I would typically bend these fingers down so that they don't try and come up through that hole. They go down, but I would like to have a small portion of these fingers parallel to the oil line. I really don't like the rough edge of this tin possibly contacting that oil line. You don't want that to happen, so you want to bend that so you have a smooth face So if there's any contact made with that oil line, it's a smooth piece of tin rubbing against it and not a sharp or hardened edge here. So open that up as necessary to fit. Make sure that you have some clearance. So test fit it as many times as necessary on the machine. We talk about that in the assembly on the 8010. You can use that one to know, that video to know how to do it on the combine. But anyway, it's the same process on that one or this one. Make sure that you have clearance around that line, and then you can bend those fingers down a little bit if you need to, or bend them to accommodate that line. So that one will bend there. We can actually put screws. I'll put a couple of screws in and hold it together. You'll notice I'm not putting all the screws in because I don't want to make this video any longer than it already has to be. However, when you're assembling this on the bench, you should put a screw through every hole that you're going to use, because when you're on the machine, you're going to have to reach underneath here probably with a little tiny screwdriver like this in your hand in order to put that screw in there. And if you haven't pre-threaded that hole, it's going to be really tough to do that with that little screwdriver like this. So run the screws in, even if you don't need them to understand the assembly, just to practice those holes. Okay, there we have the start of that enclosure. The next piece will be this the largest piece of tin in the kit, and that's the rest of this turbo wrap. And it really just picks up where the last one left off, and will come around and connect to all of these flanges. So you can bend these. I can't tell you exactly what the angles are. They're roughly 45 degrees probably, but not exactly that necessarily. The last flange on here bends out, not quite 90 degrees, it's more like 70 degrees. And that will fit right on top of the cover over the exhaust manifold. All right. Here we have the box built around the exhaust turbine. Compressor turbine would be over here on my left, your right. Exhaust pipe will come out here. There are holes here to allow air to leave this and follow the exhaust pipe up along the exhaust pipe. And then in this case, it's going to be easier for our air entry into the box, our clean air entry, to come in from the side here than it is. It's going to get pretty tight on top because we ended up coming up higher. So I made this so that we could bring the air in right alongside the manifold parallel to the exhaust pipe. So we're coming in with clean filtered air, running some of that air back out along the exhaust pipe here. Pieces we need to talk about are the pieces that represent this exhaust pipe coming up here. And they are very, very similar to the tubes that are for the existing kit, the 8010 and the 8120 kit. And so if you have trouble sorting out how they go together, you might want to look at the video where we do the install or do the bench assembly of that kit. But let's just talk through these first. Parts 14 and 15 are going to be the first two that go on here. Essentially, this exhaust pipe just extends out about this far, straight out. And so this system is just this just makes up an octagon-shaped tube to follow that exhaust pipe. And the number again is on the outside, so that would be. We're now looking at the inside of what's going to be that octagon. And I really didn't want to fold it up, but maybe it's best to do that. Here, you can look down at this and it would make the shape of an octagon, although we don't have all 8 sides of it yet. That's the bottom part that'll slide around here. This smallest flange on here, this really narrow flange, is the one that goes right on the bottom of the exhaust pipe down here. Right down here, there actually aren't any holes in the side cover there because there wasn't really room for them. But that flange is going to go right there. All of these flanges on the lower end of this bend out. I'm going to say 9. And if we want to assemble that on here, you can actually line up the holes and know that you've got it. You can actually bend it until the holes line up. Okay, so we got the bottom part of that. I just put 3 screws in. There's some more that we could put on to hold that in place. And make these 15. And this one, we can know that we've got it in the right position because this curved cutout on this little flange is going to be part of the hole for your air entry there. So these bend, again, all 45-degree angle bends. All right, I've got these bent out 90 and this bent around, and it should overlap the other one and fit up against this, which it does. Now, I'm not taking a lot of time to make the bends perfect. You can spend a little more time making them fit if you'd like. Okay, you get the idea. That goes together. Now I can see one thing, since this is the first use of this tin, I can see one thing that I neglected to do. Ordinarily I would have some holes along here to tie these two pieces, the top half and bottom half, together with screws. It looks like I missed that part of the design to put those holes in there. I can go back and do it, but I can't for the shipped kits I've already shipped. It's not likely to come apart in any regard, but you can also, these are self-drilling, self-tapping screws, so you can shoot, once you have this put together, you can shoot several screws through there if you want to, just to tie this together on the side as well as on the end. But that will enclose the lower part of the exhaust pipe. Then we have two other pieces to add on. These flanges on the back, on the end of this, will bend up, but I haven't decided exactly. You may want to bend them once it's in place to fit. There's a support bracket that supports the exhaust pipe. It's welded to it and bolted down there, so you can't move that or mess with it. But it comes in right about at the junction of these two pieces of tin. And so these flanges can be bent up to fit either inside or around that support bracket, whichever it seems best for you at the time when you're putting this in place. You can just bend them by hand when you're doing the assembly, but test that and find out where do you want them. Do you want them on the inside of that? Do you want to try and wrap them on the outside a little bit, or what? Then we have this one. This is 16, not 17. 16 is going to be the bottom, and it's got lots of cutouts here. And again, those are to accommodate that vertical support piece of flat steel that comes up and is welded to the pipe. So these will come up from the bottom, or these will bend up from the bottom like this. And these little flanges here, again, those are to fit around that. I think that they're probably best going to be bent down and out a little bit, but you can actually do it in place on the machine. That vertical sheet of steel that comes up to support the exhaust pipe will probably come in where those flanges are, like a slot. So if you open them up, they actually create a slot-like opening that you can see for that sheet piece or that piece of support steel to come up through. But you can also bend them in afterwards to be tight against that piece to minimize the amount of leakage that goes out here. These two flanges will bend, about 45 degrees. Kind of like that, maybe a little less than that. Look down, you can kind of see what I'm doing here. This wraps underneath the bottom of the previous piece. There's a hole here and a hole here, and you put a screw through the outside of each one of those to tie this to the bottom of the previous parts. I'll try and do that now. Alright, if you look at that from the bottom, you'll see that there's a slot in there, and that's where that support piece goes up through, but you can bend these flanges to try and tighten that area up as necessary. It doesn't have to be airtight, but I just don't want to dump all the air out in one spot. On this one, these three flanges bend out. The middle one about 41 degrees, and the outer one's probably a little less than that. And then these side ones will fit down over. And the holes line up there. Alright, I've put enough screws in to hold it together to show the assembly, and you may want to put in all of the screws again to tap all those holes and make sure there are holes. There may be a couple places here where there's a missing hole or two. You can drill those screws through the metal as well. But we now have a box built around the exhaust pipe. It'll come up to the muffler here, and you can bend open these tabs to just keep it clear of the muffler. You can actually bend the tabs so that they rest against or spring against the muffler to kind of hold it centered. If you have to, if for some reason the dimensions are wrong, you can always trim off of this end, cut it to fit, but it should be a little short of it, and the finger should be able to fold up against that muffler, which passes through here in this direction, so that you can kind of keep it spaced off of that and allow it now to leak the last bit of air out along that junction with the muffler. The goal is to put clean filtered air in here at the turbo, allow it to meander through the box here, filter some of it, comes out along the vents by the manifold. The rest of the air follows the exhaust pipe up here and comes out here around the muffler. I would recommend that when you get this, you assemble it all on the bench so that you know how it's going to fit together, and you get the pieces bent correctly so that we know that it'll all fit when you get on the machine. And when you get on the machine, you put it together. Once it's on the machine, I recommend you take some of that aluminum foil tape. I think there's about, something like 15 yards of it, so about 45 feet or something like that in the kit. And take strips of that. You can, it's like 2 inches wide, and you don't need 2 inches. You can cut that in half if you want to stretch it, but you can put that down these seams. I also put it over the top of a lot of the screws, not because they need to seal, but it also helps keep the screw heads from rattling so that they don't rattle loose and come out of there. So it's a bit of like Loctite. But you can put it over some of these seams if you want to minimize the amount of air loss through those little kerf cuts for the men's. You can put it on the seams around the turbo cover, but particularly use it to close up holes like around the oil lines that go in and out, so we don't dump too much air out around those penetrations of the kit. You could also put a little bit around this bracket under here if necessary, but we're getting close to the tail end there. It doesn't really matter whether we lose some of the air at that point. But you can use that tape to tighten up any spot where you think you don't want to have air loss. In general, we do want to have some airflow in different places. You'll notice on this end of the manifold cover, there's a kind of a keyhole shaped piece here. And I generally bend those outward. Well, they're designed to be bent out. But there's one here, and there's one on the bottom of the manifold cover here. That one would bend out or down. And then the radiator blast coming over here will create a little bit of an airfoil, and it will actually create a low pressure zone at that vent and pull some air out of here so that we have air that filters down along the manifold and then comes out of those holes. So that's why those are there, designed to force some flow to come down along the manifold so that doesn't end up being stagnant and get hot there. So that's the tin assembly for the early version of the 8010 with a wastegate actuator on it. With that kit, I will also provide a stub entry here. That's an HVAC stub entry that will go in there and has fingers that you can bend out, and then you can shoot some screws through to hold it on as well. And then a Flex 90 or a Swivel 90. That's a galvanized HVAC fitting that you can twist or whatever to go anywhere from straight with it to 90 degrees. We don't need to go 90 degrees, but if you decided you needed to come up a little bit or down a little bit to get underneath the exhaust, the muffler, you can use that to direct change the direction of the pipe at that point. And then from the end of that, we connect on to rubber fittings or the aluminum pipe from that point on. So that's the tin kit for the 8010, the earlier version of it. I hope that'll help you with your installation. If you have questions, you can send me an email. Let's see, what is it? harvestfires@outlook.com is the email for the website, or you can send one directly to me at daniel.humberg@sdstate.com as well. Alright, hope you have a safe harvest. Hope this kit goes on without any trouble, and once you have it plumbed, I hope you don't see any more smolders on your combine. Have a safe fall.